Joe Burrow seems to be getting his footing back, man. I mean, he looked nice on Sunday. I mean, the thing that I noticed the most was his mobility. I mean, his ability to roll outside the pocket. That was something that he just could not do in the first 5 weeks of the season. And I mean, we talked about together on this podcast, and I talked about it again with Tyler at some point. There was questions about whether or not you shut down Joe Burrow for the season with how he started his season and how his calf looked. I mean, you just don't. He's the most expensive toy in football. Why would you want to keep messing that up? But seems like he's gotten his rest, and the Bengals bounced back in a big way this past week. I mean, I gotta love Joe Burrow looking like himself again. I mean, he's got the connection with Jamar Chase. I mean, Jamar Chase has been good all season. He just hasn't really gotten targets up until these past 2 weeks. And now they're finally getting Jamar Chase involved. Now, it's still up for debate whether or not Zach Taylor's a good coach, whether this Bengals team is going to be this competitive for the rest of the season. That's all up for debate, and I'm willing to hear all of that. But Joe Burrow, he was playing like just regular Joe Schmo Joe Burrow for the first 5 weeks of the season. This is Joe Shiesty. Joe Shiesty has returned in Cincinnati, and I can't love it more, man. Gotta love the franchise quarterbacks making their stamp on the 2023 AFL season in week 6. Kind of tough, but yeah, Joe Burrow is back. I don't know how I feel about this whole Bengals team, but I think Joe Burrow being back is the first step in the process to coming back into stardom. But what do you think about Joe Burrow this week?
Yeah, I mean, as a whole, like on a pure quarterback performance basis, I think Arizona is probably the game where you point to and be like, okay,
Okay,
this was
all
Joe
right,
Burrow being
respect.
better. But I will give you the mobility thing. Like he
Yeah,
did look like he
that's
could
fine.
move a little bit more, and that's what you like to see. Now they also head into the bye week after you saw that progress. That's another great sign because now he gets full 2 weeks to rest up and heal that calf a little bit more. You would hope by week 8 it's to the point where like okay, he's pretty much like he's like 95% healthy now. Uh, but the other part of this game that I just want to touch on, I know it's not necessarily Joe Burrow, but this defense really looked good. Uh, and that was one of the primary reasons why they were able to get this win. Joe Burrow didn't
This
have as
pass
much.
rush
Yeah,
specifically.
it's
I
it's
mean,
really starting to come together because that was one of our main criticisms about the Bengals early in the season is while Burrow is unhealthy right now, usually the Bengals defense will be able to kind of keep them in games. It's not an outstanding unit, but they're very underrated. They do their job well, but they weren't even doing that at the beginning of the season, and that was the turmoil. That was why we found them troubling, and now they're starting to pick that up again. Joe Burrow's starting to pick it up again. They're just after those first few weeks for the Bengals, they turned this thing around. And I don't know, probably a month and a half from now, we're talking about them as a Super Bowl team again. We're not there yet. We're seeing positive things from Joe Burrow.
it's
We're
so
seeing,
eerily similar to what happened last year. It's
and
ridiculous.
that's what I tried. Like that's what I was trying to echo was like, look, they did this last year. It's a little different because of the injury, but they take time. I don't know why they take time. I think that part of that, and maybe not as much this year, but definitely last year, can be attributed to Zach Taylor. And like,
Thank you.
there needs to be a reason and there needs to be a fix for why you're starting 0-2, why you take 4 to 5 weeks to fully get the offense and the defense up to speed and playing at the level that we know that they can play. That part needs to be adjusted. I mean, obviously not something you can adjust until you get to try again at the beginning of next year, but like that's the main criticism of Zach Taylor for me. Because once they get going, you've got Joe Burrow, you've got Jamar Chase. I believe T. Higgins was on a snap count in this game. He didn't do a whole lot, but another guy, get him into the bye week, rest up. I believe was it a broken rib or like a really bruised rib? Because I remember the
Let
report
me
was
look.
it's just a measure of pain tolerance of like they're going to shoot him up with stuff, and it's just how much you can do. But like rib
Yep,
injury,
cracked
yeah,
rib.
yeah, like that's not something where you can just like just forget about it. Like you feel it every time you breathe. When you're a football player, you feel it every time you get tackled. So it's not the easiest injury to play through, and I think that an extra week, this bye week, I don't even really think this could be coming at a better time for Cincinnati. You have some momentum going into it. The schedule does get a little bit tougher after this stretch for them, so really good timing on the bye week, and we're talking about the Bengals as a contender again, I think.
Yeah, Absolutely. I mean, are we ready? There was some question marks about whether or not Joe Burrow was even a top five quarterback with the way he was playing to start this season. But are we ready to put him back into that category? Like for just in general, not how the season is going right now, but talent wise,
Yeah,
top five guy.
I mean, the talent wise, I don't think he ever left, and if he did, he shouldn't have because we know when he's healthy,
Well, there was some talk about that. That's what
yeah,
I'm
and I
saying.
think that was some like, oh well, he's missed 2 games within like we're talking heads on ESPN and stuff like that. We'll get that going, and that's
Yeah.
part of the problem, and that's why people don't watch that anymore. But now that he's back, it feels a lot easier to say it because for a few weeks it was like, oh well, the calf is healthy, like he's good enough to play, but he's not playing well. That was the concern, and I think that's why a lot of people were flipping out. I think the real line was that Titans loss, where they couldn't really do anything even after getting the win against the Rams on Monday Night Football. I think a lot of people were like, oh, okay, it's fixed, and then they drop another dud to Tennessee. But 2 straight wins, you get the bye. Now after that, you got to go to San Francisco, and you got the Bills on Sunday Night Football. Then you got Houston, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Jacksonville.
Got to win those 4 games.
You got it. So you got those 6. I feel like you do kind of have to win 4.
Yeah.
Like, I think they'll be at home against Houston. I think they'll be favored in that one. And they'll be at home against Pittsburgh. I think they'll be favored in that one. So you got a split at San Francisco, at home for Buffalo, at Baltimore, at Jacksonville.
While Joe Shiesty might be back, like that's my whole takeaway from this thing that he looks like you said, the mobility thing. But like this Bengals team still has serious problems, I think. Like they
I don't
didn't
think
beat the
they're.
Seahawks
Listen,
handedly on Sunday.
Seahawks are a good team. Like, the
Yeah.
Seahawks are not a bad team. And I think
But coming
that
into the season, where did we have the Bengals in comparison to the Seahawks?
yeah, I mean, but 3 weeks ago, where did we have the Bengals in compared to the Seahawks? Like, they're making progress in the right direction.
Okay.
Like, yeah,
That's
not
fair.
everything's perfect quite yet, but how many teams have everything perfect right now? Like, I think the Bengals are fine. Now, if they dropped this game in a similar way to the way that they dropped the Titans game, going into the bye week and looking at their schedule, panic button is smashed and broken. Like, we're having serious concerns in Cincinnati, but they were able to gut this win out despite, even though Burrow looked better, still wasn't like a vintage Burrow game or even as good as he
No.
was against Arizona. They were able to
I
gut
mean,
this one out with the defense.
185 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. So it's like it was like you said, not a signature Joe Burrow game by the slightest. But if you watch the game, you saw how mobile he was. You saw him rolling out of the pocket like he hasn't done at all this year. So Joe Shiesty seems to be back in Cincinnati. We'll see what the rest of the team can do as we move forward.